So let's start broadcasting there. And then we'll get started. If all of you can see the chat box, definitely let me know where you are. Of course, I know where you, hold on, let me, if all of you can. Okay, so we're live on YouTube. Welcome everyone on YouTube. No one there just yet, but we'll give them time. Someone calling in from the 916 area code, coming in now. Pat's in Texas. Okay, and if you, Shanti is in California, in Sacramento, if I recall correctly. Loretta's in Cape Cod, very nice. And if the other people can't see the chat box, it's, let me make a quick note and then we'll get started right away. Okay, here it is. Okay, very good. All right, welcome everyone. Hey, Ryan, who just came in. Nice to see you again. Tonight is a big departure on what I've been talking about for the last 11 weeks. And the reason is because for the last 11 weeks, it's sort of roughly what I wanted to cover, sort of like 12 basic concepts when it comes to eating and health. And tonight is the final chapter, so to speak, in terms of thinking about things from once you've made improvements in your health, how to influence the people who you love or people around you who you want to have some sort of impact on. And that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. So it's a little bit of a departure, as you're going to see very soon. There's also a lot that I would like to cover, and perhaps maybe I'm going a little bit overboard in terms of the amount of content. But let me start sharing my screen. And let's see here. Here's the share screen. And let's blow this up a little bit. And hey, Vicky just came in. So tonight we're going to be discussing how to influence people's health. And I put in parentheses here, how to be harmless. And the reason I put that in there is because a lot of times our desire for people to make changes in their health and in their lives in general, I suppose, often end up with us doing more damage than we wanted to. And so a lot of times the goal, or the aim, I guess I should say, you'll see very soon, is how do we influence people and also be harmless? How to be harmless to the people around us. And we'll go through these various levels of discussion. First level is the effect of those around you and having sort of a very clear understanding of what the effect is for those people. The levels of being, and we'll go through quite a bit as to really how to understand the place that people are at. And you might identify maybe the place that you're at. How to make a contribution, because ultimately when we deserve, or when we, I guess you could say that when we've reached a certain point where we've learned to be harmless to people around us, then we can start making a contribution. And how do we get our mind in a place, and what do we do to actually make a contribution? Next, we'll discuss responding to inquiry and why and how it's important to frame that in the proper way so that you understand whether someone is truly looking to make substantial changes or not. Then we'll discuss not making things important, because when you make things important, you often blow things up out of proportion and you focus on some, you get angry, you get anxious because you haven't achieved that sort of thing. Now, it doesn't mean, and we'll get into a little bit more detail about that, it doesn't necessarily mean that things aren't important, but don't make them more important than they are. And then we'll talk about showing people without really showing them once we've made those changes. So let's start, we have some more people coming in. Let's start with what the effect is of those around you. And let's just get started. So first of all, we need to acknowledge that the people around you have a very strong effect on you. And I think we underestimate that greatly. Whenever I talk about this, I always think of this one patient that I had, and she had severe atopic dermatitis for years, rashes really pretty much from head to toe. And she was willing to go through a lifestyle intervention in terms of changing her diet and doing some stress reduction. And she ended up losing 15 to 20 pounds in a matter of around 6 weeks. It was pretty remarkable. And she was feeling incredible, and her eczema was essentially gone. It was one of those really amazing transformations that I don't get to see often enough. She came back another 6 weeks later, and she had gained half the weight back. And I asked her what happened. And she said, I just can't deal with the pressure that my family is giving me on my food choices. And I just want to go back to trying different pills and creams. And at that point in time, I had spent a great deal of time studying a lot of the things that we've spoken about. And, you know, I didn't argue with her at all. And some of you may think, well, you should have argued with her because she was much better, and you know better than her when it comes to her skin. And I would argue that it is not my place to try to convince her. She saw the effect, and she made a rational decision that was right, proper, and justified for herself. And as a doctor, as doctors, we need to respect the decisions that our patients make and not to judge them, even though there are remedies and lifestyle that perhaps would be better for them. So we need to acknowledge that the people around us have a very strong effect. And there's this great quote that many of you probably have heard. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think it is so very true that we should really think about this. I was by Jim Rohn, who was sort of a motivational speaker. And really, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And I think this is really, really powerful to think about, and to think about who those people are and how are we similar to those people? Because again, we don't want to underestimate the importance of this, because you are more likely, as an example, to be obese if people around you are obese. And this has been proven in twin studies, meaning they've everyone says, well, genetics or environment. Well, they have been able to show that a twin who grows up in a family that is thin and has friends that are thin versus the twin that grew up in a different circumstance, the environment makes all the difference in the world. So we need to not underestimate the effect of those around you. And just like that patient, for the people that a bunch of people just came in, the patient that I had who cured her eczema with lifestyle, but decided that she didn't want to continue on that lifestyle because of the pressure of her friends, we can't underestimate that. And also, of course, we need to respect the decisions of people once they understand it. If they decide that they want to make different decisions, then that's basically their prerogative. So the question becomes next is, how do we help disidentifying from these influences? And I use the word disidentifying specifically because what happens is we subconsciously identify with these influences. They become sort of like a little speaking meme in our head that is speaking to us in our name based on the influences of the people around us. So we need to learn to disidentify from these influences so that they don't influence us. And we're going to go through various different things here that I think are very foundational to just overall growth, but more importantly, because we're talking mostly about health here in these lectures, is to be able to understand what's going on and how different modes of teaching are important for people. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that a lot of the content that we're talking about tonight is from 2 teachers I've had. The first is a doctor by the name of Gerald Epstein. And I studied with him for many, many years. And a lot of the content comes from material that I learned from Dr. Epstein. And the second person is another doctor by the name of Dr. Robert Rhondell Gibson, who wrote quite a bit in the 80s and 90s. I think he died in the early 2000s. So a lot of the content is I learned from these amazing, incredible teachers. So first of all, no one knows you better than you. It is the institutions of the world like to tell you and try to convince you that they know you better than you. The government, the education, all these sorts of things. I just want to go over to the chat box just so it's up on my screen in case. No one knows you better than you. So institutions, education, health care, politics, they all try to tell you that they know you better than you. No one knows you better than you. The second thing I'd like to say is you have to be careful with sharing. And the reason is because sometimes when we embark on a new health plan and we start to see results, we almost get this evangelical-like feeling that we need to share it with everyone around us. I would tell you to be careful with that because you encounter a great deal of resistance from people when you do that. Because quite frankly, if you've made substantial improvements in your health, there are going to be people who resent you for making those changes. Maybe because they're judging you, maybe because they've tried and they haven't been able to make it themselves. A lot of times it's subconscious that they just feel resentful that you've been able to make a change that they haven't been, and they can't really affect that you are really capable of doing this, and maybe they aren't. And it's a subconscious feeling that they sometimes get. So I would be careful with sharing your new health goals, your new health experimentation, all that sort of stuff. Wait a little while. Don't go crazy with it, because I can't tell you, just like the example that I told you, now of the patient with eczema that cleared herself, obviously she couldn't not share that because it was her immediate family that was judging her negatively because of these changes. But when it comes to other people around you, like your friends or your coworkers, I would be careful not to share it. And I highly recommend that you actually don't share it. Eventually, you'll start to see people who you're improving, you're looking better, you're more radiant and shining, and people who want to make a change will come up to you and they will ask you, what have you been doing? That's the point where you can start telling them what you're doing. And we'll get into what you do and how you do that so that you have the most impact and preserve the freedom of the person that you are talking to. So the goal here is, the next part of your goal is to find a mentor and not a guru. And there's this great quote in the Talmud, a section of the Talmud called Ethics of the Fathers. And it says, let me just move this a little bit. It says, make for yourself a teacher and acquire for yourself a friend and judge each person favorably. And there was a lot of discussion about this verse because it combines many things that seem almost separate. Make yourself a teacher. Let's just go through this very quickly. It doesn't say find yourself a teacher. It says make yourself a teacher, which basically means that you are to find someone who perhaps knows more than you do and to make them your teacher, not to find the top of the line expert, but in the situation that you're in now, to find someone that you can learn with, to always be open to finding people who you can learn with. Then it says to acquire for yourself a friend. It is always helpful being conscious of being careful with sharing sort of the new start of your health is to be able to do it with someone who shares the same goals and the same feelings in terms of making changes and having a strong impact on your health. And judge every person favorably. And the reason I think that this is included in these three, what seem to be very somewhat different ideas, is that when we embark on this new learning path, and in this case, we're talking about health, that we need to be able to see people where they are at And the way we do that is to judge each person favorably. So all of these three sort of disparate ideas actually come together very, very nicely in this verse. So let's talk about what makes a good mentor and what makes a bad mentor, so that one, you don't get tripped up by people looking for, I look for mentors. Everyone is on, no matter what level you're at, you are always should be making for yourself an additional teacher, acquiring yourself a friend, judge each person favorably. So this goes for you becoming a mentor for people, and also for you choosing a mentor. So what does a bad mentor do? And these are mostly the health, I mean, you'll see that a lot of health gurus out there, quite frankly, politicians as well, exhibit some of these features of bad mentors. So they increase your dependency, meaning you always need to go to them to get their opinion, or you become dependent on the fact that you need their advice to be able to go anywhere. And what's the difference? The difference between that and a good mentor is the good mentor is going to encourage you to experiment. And obviously they're there to serve as a resource, but they're not going to make decisions for you that are going to make you more dependent at each level. Now, the marketing techniques of gurus, and I've studied marketing since I was a teenager. It was one of those things that I was fascinated with. Marketing, you know, most of these gurus have many different ways of increasing your dependency to go from level to level. And it's very negative, because it is not liberating you from them or making you independent. It's increasing your dependency on them. They become the source of knowledge. They also blame for you. They say things like, it's not your fault. And that's one of the classic things. It's not your fault. You know, your genetics are bad. Your environment is bad. And these are why, you know, you're not being able to lose weight, or it's why you have this condition, or whatever it may be. But they are very good they're always there to blame for you. And they complain for you as well. They will try to stick up for your rights. And when they do that for you, and they're robbing you of your own ability to make decisions for yourself, you become dependent on them. And that is going to, obviously, if you're becoming dependent on them, it increases your dependency on them. It is a type of enslavement, even though you may feel as though you are learning about health and getting better. And of course, this extends to way beyond health teachers to many different spheres of, you know, it pertains to, you know, doctors, it pertains to politicians, it pertains to professors at universities. All these ideas are very, very applicable to many different things. The next thing they do is they continually make suggestions about the future. They say, if you do this, then this is going to happen. If you don't do this, then that's going to happen. And it's all about making you feel good or bad. And when you are able to make people feel good or bad because you are making suggestions, that is another form of control. So what's the alternative? What does a good mentor do? Well, a good mentor is really only interested in becoming liberated, or being able to become, as I always say, become your own authority in health. That is what a good mentor does. And when I first met Dr. Gerald Epstein, he invited me to a class of his, and the class was called Becoming Your Own Authority. And in that class, that one session, that one class, changed really the way that I look at treating patients forever, because it was at that moment that I learned that my job as a physician is to foster you becoming your own authority in health. This is your birthright. Your birthright is to be able to make decisions for yourself. And I can't stress that enough. It's the whole reason that I love teaching. And it is the central core idea that really, I think, is that we've been discussing over these last 12 weeks, if you can believe it's been 12 weeks now. The good mentor does not agree that you are a helpless victim. And in fact, the good mentor, oftentimes when he is talking to you and not agreeing with you that you are a helpless victim, can appear somewhat distant. They can appear not, quote, nice. And in fact, the bad mentor often comes across very, very nice. Because they're blaming for you. Oh, it's not your fault. You don't, all this sort of stuff. That can come across nice. Oh, they care so much for me. Well, they're not a good mentor. They're a bad mentor. A good mentor is not going to agree that you're a helpless victim and is going to insist on your ability to be independent, not necessarily independent right off the bat. There is a learning process involved in that, but that you have control and you can make changes for yourself. A good mentor gives you things to try and experiment for yourself. That's why I always say, when people are looking for different things and they want something to do, I always suggest, look, don't trust me. Try it for yourself and see what the result is. You should experiment for yourself. Now, obviously, I think that there are experiments in health that are dangerous, and I will share that with people. That's not what we're talking about necessarily. But it is important that we look at things not as that there's one way, because we are not machines. We are very complicated beings of many different levels, humans. We're not machines. And it's important that you try and experiment with different things. The good mentor doesn't want to do it for you. They want you to do it for yourself. And I hope that through these weeks that we've been discussing and the weeks to come, that you'll realize that, or at least you'll see that my goal here is for you to do the self-experimentation and to really foster decision-making. And this is so important because we often are victims of doubt and denial, but let's focus on doubt. And doubt causes us to have the inability to make a decision. That's basically what doubt is. And when we are incapable of making a decision, we're not saying yes or no. We are just caught in limbo and paralyzed with doubt. And it says in Deuteronomy, every day I set before you life and death, choose life. Now, every decision that you make during the day, whether it is a food decision to choose between an apple and a donut, is either a life-affirming decision or a life-denying decision. Just like the verse says, every day I set for you life and death, choose life. And Jesus even says in the Sermon on the Mount, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but he said, say yes or no, everything else comes from evil. So we need to get into the habit of making a decision, using it as an experiment if we're not 100% sure, and seeing if we chose life or not. Sometimes the decision is not so clear. Other times it is clear, but we need, the good mentor is going to tell you to make that decision and to not waste time with being in limbo, not making a decision. Say yes or say no. Don't give me anything else. And the same thing goes that I can tell you that, again, in this case, the good, Pat is saying, will this help me or will it harm me? Right, exactly. You are able to make that decision for yourself. And maybe you're not sure about it, but you need to get into the habit of making that decision, because that's the only way that you become your own authority in health. Now, the good mentor looks and can appear very stern and, quote, not nice, because we're so used to bad mentors placating and being, sometimes disgustingly sweet and nice. The good mentor is going to foster decision-making, which can be difficult for people who are not used to making decisions. Look, let's be honest, there are many of us, and I count myself as one of them, that went through periods in my life where I was having trouble making decisions between yes and no. And there's always going to be that. There's decision fatigue that many people have, where sometimes they're so used to making decisions for other people and for business that there is such a thing called decision fatigue. Well, we're talking about health. So we try to refresh ourselves and try to say, just like Pat is saying, will this harm me? Will this help me? Make a decision. If you don't know, still make a decision. And I can tell you with my mentors, Dr. Epstein included, could appear very stern, very, very stern when it was involved in really helping me to become liberated, to be able to make my own decisions, not just with health, but with other things. So I hope that helps you with discovering whether or not the people that you're listening to health-wise, are they a good mentor or are they a bad mentor? All right, so let's close this and move on. The next is to let go of expectations, both for yourself and for others. And one of that's a whole probably talk in and of itself, but I would like everyone to be conscious of the words should, would, and could in both your vocabulary and others, because anytime someone uses the words you should, you would, you could, all that stuff is putting things into the future. And it's a future that we don't know what it is. So in a sense, it's like magical thinking. It is not real. I mean, yes, yes, you hear people saying all the time, oh, if you could only do this, or if you should have done this, or if you say to yourself in damaging terms, I should have done, I could have done, I would have done. If I did, all these sorts of things, they're useless. And I put here, be conscious of it, because when people are using that around you, especially when it refers to you, if you just get used to it, then it can help you to overcome the impact of those words. Because when it's someone who you respect says you should do this, you could have done this, or you could do this, then it's not helpful, because it's, again, some sort of, they're speaking for you. And again, the goal here is for you to become your own authority, as I said. So just be conscious of it. Don't judge. Just be conscious of it. Make an experiment, like we've been talking about, of just for the next day, focusing on both when you say the words should, would, and could, or when people are talking about you, to you, regarding those words. Just be conscious of it, is all I can say, and you'll really start to realize certain things. Now let's talk about the levels of being, because if we want to influence people, we have to see where they are. That old expression, you can't understand someone unless you've walked a mile in their moccasins. Well, perhaps we can learn a little bit about various levels of being to sort of identify where people might be and whether they're really even receptive to making changes. Now, all of you who are on here, and welcome to all the other people who are on. Hi, Sheila. Is to identify where they are, and of course, where we might be in sort of this scale of levels of being. These are levels from Dr. Robert Rhondell Gibson. Many cultures have many different ways of sort of parsing this out. This is just one, but we'll go through it very, very quickly. So let's start with the four dual basic urges. And these are basically, we all suffer from these. Just gonna blow this up a little bit. We are all making decisions for the most part based on these four different levels: physical, mental, emotional, and transcendental. And we are essentially, on the physical level, we are making decisions between whether we want to either gain comfort or pleasure, or escape pain and discomfort. On the mental level, attention versus being ignored. Emotional, approval versus disapproval. And transcendental, being needed, feeling important versus inferiority and insignificance. And most of the decisions that we make, probably 99% of the decisions we make throughout our life, revolve around these four levels and these four dichotomies of experience between gaining, essentially we can look at just the physical level of, we say to ourselves, is this going to cause comfort or pleasure, or is it going to cause pain or discomfort? And as we go up the levels, it's just another way of expressing that. And one of the things that we need to realize is that we are all trapped in this, but there is something beyond that. Most of the time when I share this with people, they feel like there's nothing beyond this, but I hope to not convince you, but to show you as we go through this next section of the lecture, what those are. And I see we're already 30 minutes into the hour, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. All right, so the four forces. What are the four forces? Well, anytime you embark on something, whether it's a new health plan, or a good analogy here would be making a piece of pottery. The initiative is we have the thought that we want to make a piece of pottery. And we get the clay and we put it down on the spinner, the potter's wheel, and we push our hands into the clay. That is the resistance of the clay. Because if there was no resistance, there'd be no end result. There'd be no vase that you're trying to make. Therefore, we live in this material world where there is always resistance. And quite frankly, it's necessary and it's valuable. But because we're operating from the four dual basic urges, at the moment, we see it, excuse me, we see it as pain. In some cases, we see it as being ignored or disapproval or inferiority even. But the fact is as I've said, is there is something that exists beyond that. And that is, we'll get into a little bit later, that the resistance, or what some people call the second force, the first force of you wanting to do something, and then the second force coming to meet you and provide resistance, usually the meaning and the value can be found in the resistance. So when you encounter resistance, I know, look, all of us fall into this. I'm not suggesting by any stretch that I have superseded all of what I'm talking about here. We all have situations where it's very hard for us to be able to see how this resistance is valuable and has meaning. That is for sure. But with time, and quite frankly, in retrospect, most of the time, when you go through something, you realize that the value and the meaning was in the resistance. So the resistance comes and the cup or the vase starts to take form, and then the result happens, and you don't know what that's going to be. And that's the greatest thing possible, that you don't know what it's going to be. And the reason is because if everything you did in your entire life, you knew exactly what the end result would be, that would be a pretty boring life. So between the necessary and valuable resistance and letting go of what the end result is, life becomes a lot more interesting. And the goal in terms of health, since we're talking about that, is that there's no question that you get resistance, and you get resistance on all the different levels. You get social resistance, as we've spoken about already. You get bodily resistance when you move to eating a different way. Your body often rebels because of it's addicted to blood sugar spikes and to wheat and dairy, these sorts of things. These are another form of resistance. Your body is happily going on because it's addicted to various substances. And the end result, look, the fact is that health is one of those things that you can't know what the end result of a health plan is going to be. You can do everything right. You can learn everything there is to know, and you can still suffer from bad health. That is the fact of the matter. There are people who are experts in nutrition and lifestyle that are sick and who suffer from sickness. Does that mean they're doing something wrong? No, actually it doesn't. Sometimes just things don't go. There are so many factors involved. We are not machines. And when you think of this as, when I say that if they got sick and it means they were doing something wrong, it means you have adopted the opinion that humans are machines. And I guess one of the point I'd like to make with that is, again, humans are not machines. We are very complicated creatures with with a consciousness that is so incredibly deep that we really don't have 1% understanding of. So, so there's that. So these are the four forces, and they're going to happen with anything that you do. So try to learn to embrace the resistance as necessary and valuable. Expect it. If there's anything to expect, people will always say, let go of expectations. I'm even going to mention that probably somewhere along here. But in this case, you can always expect some resistance. It is just the nature of how things work. And when you make changes in your health, that is essentially just wait for it to happen. From friends, from your body, from so whatever, just many different levels. Okay, I'm going to go through this very, very quickly because time is speeding right along. So there are levels of being, and all of us are in these different levels. So the first level is sleep, and we all know what sleep is. The next is a walking or waking sleep. Let's talk about that for a moment. Inside of a waking or walking sleep, there are many different levels, and they are basically characterized as apathy, fear, held resentment, anger, boredom, and contentment. And we'll go through these very, very quickly. And the reason that they are listed under Dr. Robert Rhondell's walking or waking sleep is because they are, when you're caught in these, you're not fully aware of what is going on. You're not fully conscious, quite frankly. So first level is apathy. This is where you've gotten to the point, and these are all, you can apply these to everything in life, basically, but we're talking about health. So you meet people who they're just like, what's the use? Whatever you do, they're just not interested, and they don't see any impact on doing anything to improve their health. Those are people who are caught in this level of apathy. Then we have people who are caught in fear, and these are sort of the predominant emotions that they're feeling, often, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously. Something's going to get them. There's no time for anything else. They're in self-protection mode all the time. So broaching topics of health, it's, again, can't understand someone if you haven't walked a mile in their moccasins. Well, if they're in their fear moccasins, so to speak, it's difficult to reach them because they're constantly in self-protection mode. Now, most of the time, actually, Dr. Gibson noted that a lot of people who are in this are often have some weight problems. And obviously, it doesn't mean if you have weight problems that you also are in sort of fear mode, but he happened to notice that. The next is held resentment, where people are basically, they're constantly fighting in their mind. They're basically in this constant mode of imagining and of getting into different fights constantly. And it's basically a form of hate. And their mind is, again, also not receptive because they are caught in this. Next is anger. Sometimes these people are very successful, type A personality. They've sort of achieved certain things in their life, but they're constantly sticking up for what they think they deserve. And when you come along and want to help them improve their health, in this case, they often feel like you are not, they've already made a certain success of themselves, and they're on this sort of path. It's very difficult for them to hear also. Next is boredom. And this is where people have, they've had ideals. We'll talk a little bit about the distinction between ideals and goals and aims and such in just a moment. But in this case, we're talking about ideals where they had an idea of the perfect perfect health or whatever it is. And quite frankly, they've achieved some of that. And they feel like they've just found where they're at, that, they've achieved some sort of health goal, and they're just bored now. They think they sort of have made some progress, and then they just fall into boredom. And they think, well, what's the use? I've been there, done that. And in this case, as Dr. Robert Rhondell Gibson says, life is a big disappointment. Well, health, new health types of knowledge. I've been there, done that. It's just another one of those things. So these people are caught in sort of the boredom phase. And then there's contentment. They basically achieved a level of success and comfort. And similar to the people in boredom, except they're not bored, they're just not interested in pursuing things further. They are very content with their health. They're very content with whatever success they've achieved in improving their health. And they're just not interested in pursuing anything further. They're pretty happy with how things are. They feel fine. And they're just content, basically. And these people also, there's a way of reaching all of these people. But the point is that knowing where they're at is very, very helpful to address them in the state that they're in. For someone who's content and not interested in pursuing things further, I always explain to them that they don't really know that you can always feel better. Your health can always improve. There are just an infinite number of levels. And the goal is not necessarily for you to live forever. It's for you to be able to have the most energy and to accomplish as much as you want in your life. But these people, that's one of the ways you reach people who are sort of in this contentment phase. And each one of these things, there is a way of addressing them that will encourage them to maybe ask questions about what you might be involved in when it comes to improving your health. Now, after walking or waking sleep, there's what's called self-awareness. And it's basically divided into three categories in this case, in this sort of categorization. First is vital interest. Many of us go through this. And the point that I'd like to stress here with all of these levels is that you don't make these, you don't make them happen. They just happen. You can't force yourself to be vitally interested or exhilarated or to become the artist, which we'll explain in just a moment. It is something that happens. And when you pursue vital interest, you're not going to get it. You get vital interest by sort of waking up and realizing that many of us are caught in all of these, various stages of these different levels. And when we realize that how fake they are, and I shouldn't say they're real, obviously, but they are not objectively seeing what's going on. So when you have vital interest, you're alert, you shine, you start accepting the ups and downs of your journey. You start acknowledging second force, that resistance that occurs with this sort of thing, and you start seeing the meaning in the struggle. And when you go through this, you get this, you become vitally interested. I think many of us who are on this call, this class, I think most of you have probably felt this because you are on a health journey. And as much as the journey can be a real struggle, you've had moments where you have been alert and you've shined and that sort of thing. After that, you can experience what's called exhilaration or bliss or flow. Flow was described, I think in the 80s by a psychologist, where basically things just are coming easily. You're moving, your decisions are going good, everything is just flowing. And this is exhilaration. And again, you can't make it happen. It sort of happens as a result of realizing what we're talking about. And if you make it important, it can go away. The reason is because, again, if you are pursuing some sort of ideal that it has to be a certain way, then you're going to be disappointed because these are experiences that just happen. Then there's the artist. The artist starts to see relationships between things. I think all of us have had moments in our life where something, happens that is very emotional, and we just start to see things in perspective, and we start to see connections in ways that we never did before. And these are the levels that happen. And again, they just sort of happen. And all of us on health journeys can experience those as well. And there's additional levels even of what's called objective awareness. In this case, there's no ideal, there's no perfect thing. An ideal is a situation that usually is made up by someone else that we've adopted for ourselves, and we become disappointed when we don't achieve it. It's somewhat like an idol, where obviously in ancient days, they worshiped this fixed image, and the fixed image was an ideal is a fixed image that we're trying to compare ourselves to. That is never a good thing because we are unique individuals. Our journey is never the same, never the same as another journey. So we can't compare ourselves to ideals. We have to look at ourselves and we have to realize that some of the things that we want to achieve are ideals. And I guess here's a good point to talk about, well, if you're not pursuing an ideal, then what are you doing? Well, there's a difference between an ideal, which is often a goal, and an aim. And the difference is this. A goal is a fixed outcome. And quite frankly, none of us know what a fixed outcome is. An aim is a direction for you to pursue. And it allows for you to let go of the end result. Now, if you're on a direction, that means that you are trying to point yourself in a place where you want to go. But we're not staking everything on reaching that goal, because as we talked about with the 4 forces, resistance comes along, pushes us away, but sometimes the end result is a lot more beautiful than what we thought of. So when we try to pursue a very strict and rigid goal and rigid ideal that may not be of our own creation even, that is by definition, to make it very simple, it's worshiping this fixed image. And we want to just focus on our direction and embrace the resistance that comes and leave the end result to how it's going to be. And in objective awareness, there's what I call Epstein's levels of unconditionality. This is where you really start to see things unconditionally, where you're not constrained by anything really. Obviously, not many people reach this level. I'm certainly not saying I have, that's for sure. But I think it's a beautiful description of the evolution of the possibilities, let's say. So unconditional thinking. So when your thinking is not constrained, when it's not conditioned by anything, it's freed up, then you experience intuition. When you have feelings that are not conditioned by anything, by people's expectations, by cultural expectations of emotion, by pain in your body that's affecting your ability to open up, whatever it is, when you free that up and you are feeling without any conditions, that's love. Unconditional action, if you freed up your action, in other words, your ability to make a decision is not conditioned by what someone might say, what the culture says, how your body feels, all these sorts of things. When it's unconditioned, when it's separated from all the conditions, that is faith. It is the true ability to make a decision for yourself. That's what faith is. Faith is the ability to make a decision. That's one definition of faith. Unconditional relationship. So if you're in a relationship and it's fully conditional, it's not just love. When you've taken away everything, and everything that's conditioned upon that is freed, then it's pure acceptance. It's pure, what's called agape. It's pure love. And I think, and then unconditional language. Whenever we want to, express something very, very detailed or anything, the act of language is an incredible constriction because we have, like this insight that we want to express. And then we have to pause and think to ourselves, how do I explain this insight that I have? And we do this unconsciously all day long. I mean, we're basically constricting these thoughts into words that can express an idea. And what happens when you free that up? You just receive an image. And that's why, you know, the prophets and the mystics of all times, when they freed themselves up, they had, you know, like visions. It's because of freeing up the conditions around things. And Dr. Epstein came up with these, and I think they're really beautiful. It's a beautiful way of thinking about what happened, what are the possibilities of living a life where you're not conditioned by the things around you. All right, so let's move on to how to make the details about making a contribution in terms of how to think about that. And I know that I appreciate everyone's patience and I appreciate you being patient for something that is very, very different than what I've spoken about. But this is important, I believe. Of course, I said not to make anything too important, but I think it's important in the terms of rounding out what we've been speaking about for a long time. So Shanti is saying, my goodness, this is what ancient yogic philosophy states. This is called self-realization. How strange and amazing hearing it in your words. Basically achieving divinity, which all saints have said is very possible in this lifetime. Well, thank you, Shanti. And I would say that that this is a very, you know, this is sort of the Western take on, you know, this is sort of Western spirituality as opposed to Eastern, but as you can see that there are always at the higher sort of mystical levels, connections between those, because these sort of states of being have been acknowledged by all ancient cultures around the world. Of course, I didn't learn it through yogic, I learned it through a very, very specific Western path, but it's wonderful that you're seeing you know, and something very, very similar. So that's great. Thank you for saying that. Okay, so let's talk. Oh, sorry, we are here on analogical thinking versus cause and effect thinking in terms of making contributions. So analogical thinking is thinking by analogies. And as I've said, well, I don't know if I've said it just yet, but essentially all the great teachers in the world speak in parables. And the reason they speak in parables is because it's an analogy. It's, you know, if any of you have had people who are great storytellers, you know, they're people who can relate everything in life to the game of baseball, as an example, or they can relate everything in life to, you know, having a dog or all these sorts of things. These are great teachers who are able to see connections between people. As I stated in this sort of self-awareness section, which I didn't really mention, but the artist is this higher level of being, the so-called artist is seeing relationships between things. And that's sort of what we're talking about here, that I have always been so amazed at people who are able to just like instantly come up with an analogy for something. And those people are really the greatest teachers we have. I think all of you can think of people who are always good at saying, you know, this is just like this, or this is just like that. And when we can get into the habit of thinking analogically versus logically, which is cause and effect thinking, not that there's anything wrong with logic, we'll talk about that in just a moment, but thinking analogically allows us to become great teachers because it allows us to relate concepts to people without being technical. I mean, you can teach an idea through an idea that people understand. That's what an analogy is. And again, that's why all the great teachers in the world taught in parables. In every single tradition, no one starts by teaching people all the intricacies of how the soul and the spirit work. They teach with basic, simple stories that can understand, that can, you know, portray depths. And the same thing goes when you're teaching people about health. If you can give it you can give an analogy I use the analogy of a machine both as a negative and as a positive, because when people understand that there are certain aspects of the human creature that you can look at as a machine, the majority of the time you can't. And when we treat the human as a machine, it's a perversion, because we are so deep, and our consciousness is so vast that it is an absolute perversion to do that. And quite frankly, most of modern medical education is seeing people as machines, as one input yielding one output, this sort of cause and effect thinking, which projects into the future. And as I've stated, that's a form of magical thinking. And it makes conclusions also, which is in the future. No one can tell you where or what you're going to be. No doctor can tell you when you're going to die. Doctors who tell people they have 3 months to live are engaged in a horrendous act, because if you haven't become your own authority in health and you are still deferring to positions of authority, and I'm not saying that there are people who are experts. I'm not saying not to listen to experts, but you know yourself better than anyone. And when someone tells you you have 3 months to live and they haven't realized that they are more than a machine, and that the doctor has all the knowledge, they often live 3 months, not because they couldn't live 3 months, but because their immune system just tends to die out at 3 months because they're expecting to die at that time. It's a terrible thing that can sometimes happen. So we should be careful of making conclusions. Of course, I just said should, but the point is that when we make a conclusion, that closes the matter. And when you close the matter, you're not open to any sort of inquiry whatsoever. Making a conclusion, well, if it's revolving around something in the future, that's a form of magical thinking, because we're trying to distance ourselves from holding on to some future. We know our directions, but we're not going to make conclusions. And unfortunately, what's happened is that that this sort of cause and effect, logical, machine-like type of thinking is often used to sort of figure out human relationships. It tries to figure out how things work. And when you're not using analogical thinking, which isn't perfect, there are limitations to it, of course, depending on each analogy has its different depths. Then we get to a point where logic, just pure cause and effect thinking, is not going to solve everything. And when we're stuck in this sort of machine-like thinking, we're really not able to see the deep connections between things. We're not able to see that. So as you're learning about health, it's important to think about it. And that's sort of one of those things. So what are the other modes of thinking? Well, if there's analogical thinking and there's logical or cause and effect thinking, all of these things have their role. There's also other things of other modes of thinking. There's moral, intuitive, imaginal, and esoteric. Obviously, we're not going to go into those, but I wanted to include them in here because we're talking about thinking, and I don't want you to think there's just logical and just analogy thinking, but there's also thinking in a moral sense, an intuitive sense, an imaginal sense, and an esoteric sense. And the fact is that, for example, as I'll just briefly say, in terms of moral thinking or moral, there's even a moral memory. People get older and they might not think, they might not remember everything. They often maintain an incredible moral memory, and they're able to have this incredible moral intelligence, even though they can't remember the details in the past. It's sort of one of those amazing things about aging. Okay, let's keep on going. We're getting near the end. We're certainly up to the hour, but the rest goes pretty quickly. So how do we respond to inquiry? As we've said before, are you looking for an ideal? Are the people that you are trying to influence, are they looking for an ideal? Maybe talking about the 4 forces is important. Sharing experimentation. Remember, the good mentor is going to get you to instead of telling to do something, you're going to foster experimentation, emphasizing the direction that they want to go to become their own authority, not some fixed ideal. We spoke about preserving their freedom, not playing into their feelings of helplessness. Again, encouraging decision and experimentation. We spoke about goals, an ideal, a fixed image. We want to go towards aims. We want to focus on a direction. It takes so much stress off of things. Believe me, just let go of your goals. You know where you want to go. Walk on the road, walk towards the direction, let go of the end result. You know the direction is a life-affirming life decision, and just walk on the road. Do not focus yourself too much on some fixed image. And when you make something too important, you are open to a lot of negative emotions because it's so important. If I don't get there, there's anxiety, you're not going to get it. There's anger. All these sorts of things happen when you make things too important in terms of, in this case, your health. And show them without showing. As we've spoken about, the meaning is found in the struggle. Embracing second force. Sometimes it's difficult, as we spoke about. There's always second force, and being able to see the value in that in the moment is very, very difficult. Secondly, if you think you found the way, that you're on this road, it seems like everything's great, and you settle in and you say, I found it. This is the way to go. Then you're basically lost, because there's always second force. When second force appears to disappear, you are lost. And that is the truth, no matter where you are. This is an infinite progression of growth, both with your health and everything else. And now, hopefully, you can understand that there are people, who are in situations, in states of mind that are not going to be receptive. So, and then, of course, be conscious of those should, woulds, coulds, etc. So that is tonight's class. Sort of a departure from our regular discussions, but I do appreciate everything your attention. Next week, we're going to go back to our regular programming, so to speak, which is we're going to be talking about fiber. There's remarkable things to learn about fiber, especially how fiber has become important in our lives, but in the completely different way than you would expect. The history of why certain types of fiber are emphasized more than the types of fiber that are actually making the most important impacts to your health. It's a very fascinating story, a very fascinating history. And when you get through it, you'll realize so many other sources of improving your fiber intake. Besides taking a fiber supplement, increasing grains, there's so many other ways and so many nuances to understanding fiber and its effect. So this has been, I appreciate all of you for sticking on for something very, very different from what we've done in the past. I've certainly referenced some of these things in previous classes, but I wanted to put it in here because many of you who have been with me for all 12 weeks are probably at certain stages of realization that you would like other people to be with you, the people you love to be with you, along with you, influencing those people's health that you love. And until you have a little bit more of an understanding of where they might be, you're not going to have that same effect, but also to show you where maybe some of us are caught ourselves. So thank you so much again for everyone and all your attention. And again, I appreciate your health, and I look forward to, and your attendance, and I look forward to talking to you about fiber next Wednesday at 8 p.m. And every Wednesday, I look forward to doing that. And then the week after that, just so you know, we're going to be talking about circadian rhythms and the new science of what's called chronobiology, which is really fascinating. It's incredible how much impact there is to your circadian rhythm, to everything in your body. And I'm going to go through all of that as well. So as always, thank you for your attention. Again, my goal is for you to become your own authority. And I hope with these lectures, you're starting to realize how important that is and have the confidence to realize that you can make your own decisions for yourself. And that really would make me feel amazing, because that is my aim. So everyone, have a great night, and I look forward to seeing you next time. And Vicky, just so you know, is saying, fantastic presentation, thank you. I've lost a lot of weight recently, and this helps when people ask or are interested or even jealous. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's great to have this sort of in your mind and realize that's just the way it is, and just keep on going, keep on moving. And someone's asking about Lucy. She's in the other room, but she got her big, she had a cone on last week, and she's she's running around, and I'll bring her next time. So have a great night, everyone. Bye-bye.